2. Theories of foreign policy decision-making. Introduction. Foreign policy decision-making involves complex processes that significantly impact national security, international relations, and global stability. Scholars and practitioners use theoretical models to explain how governments make decisions regarding international affairs. 3 primary models: the rational actor model, organizational behavior model, and bureaucratic politics model provide distinct frameworks for understanding foreign policy decisions. B. Rational actor model, definition and assumptions. The rational actor model posits that nations act as unified and rational entities, making decisions by carefully calculating costs and benefits. It assumes that decision-makers possess complete information, clearly defined goals, and the ability to identify and choose optimal solutions to achieve national interests. Decision-making process. Identification of problem. The nation recognizes an international issue or threat. Goal determination. Objectives are clearly articulated, usually prioritizing national security, economic prosperity, or strategic advantage. Evaluation of alternatives. Decision-makers systematically assess available policy options, weighing their respective advantages and disadvantages. Selection of optimal choice. The option that maximizes expected benefits and minimizes potential costs is selected. Implementation and monitoring. The chosen policy is enacted and continuously monitored for effectiveness. Application and examples. Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962. The U.S. government's decision to impose a naval blockade against Cuba illustrates a calculated assessment of strategic alternatives to avoid nuclear conflict, while compelling Soviet withdrawal. Economic sanctions. Decisions to impose economic sanctions on nations violating international norms reflect rational considerations, balancing diplomatic pressure, economic impact, and desired outcomes. Criticisms. Oversimplification. Critics argue the rational actor model oversimplifies decision-making by ignoring internal complexities, organizational limitations, psychological biases, and incomplete information scenarios. Unrealistic assumptions. Real-world constraints often challenge assumptions of perfect rationality and complete information. C. Organizational behavior model. Definition and assumptions. The organizational behavior model emphasizes that foreign policy decisions result from established routines, standard operating procedures, SOPs, and organizational processes within government bureaucracies. It assumes that decisions reflect organizational structures, institutional practices, and historical routines rather than purely rational calculations. Decision-making process. Problem recognition. Organizations identify issues based on institutional priorities, mandates, and routine responsibilities. Application of SOPs. Decision-making relies heavily on established procedures and routines, limiting flexibility and innovation. Incremental choices. Decisions typically represent incremental adjustments, rather than significant policy shifts influenced by past decisions. And organizational inertia. Implementation. Constraints. Execution depends heavily on organizational capacity, standard routines, available resources, and established procedures. Application and examples. Military responses. Military institutions often rely on established contingency plans and SOPs when responding to international crises, as seen in military deployments following terrorist attacks or border conflicts. Diplomatic protocols. Foreign ministries utilize standardized diplomatic protocols in negotiations, treaty signings, and conflict mediation, limiting improvisation and reinforcing continuity. Criticisms. Bureaucratic rigidity. Critics highlight that reliance on SOPs may lead to suboptimal decisions, as rigid routines can prevent flexible, innovative responses. Limited adaptability. Organizational inertia may hinder rapid adaptation to evolving international challenges or unforeseen crises. D. Bureaucratic politics model. Definition and assumptions. The bureaucratic politics model asserts that foreign policy decisions result from political bargaining, negotiations, and power struggles among competing government agencies, officials, and interest groups. It assumes that decision outcomes reflect compromises shaped by institutional interests, personal ambitions, bureaucratic competition, and internal politics rather than purely rational considerations. Decision-making process. Multiple actors. Decision-making involves multiple government actors, each with distinct interests, preferences, and objectives. Bargaining and negotiation agencies and officials engage in bargaining, negotiation, and compromise to shape policy outcomes, often reflecting political influence and bureaucratic leverage. Power dynamics decisions are influenced significantly by the relative power, status, and influence of bureaucratic entities and their leaders. Compromise outcomes. Final decisions often represent negotiated compromises, reflecting the internal political dynamics and competing bureaucratic interests. Application and examples. Vietnam War decisions. The decision-making during the Vietnam War involved intense bureaucratic conflicts between the Department of Defense, State Department, intelligence agencies, and White House advisors, resulting in policy compromises and incremental escalations. Post-9/11 U.S. foreign policy. The Bush administration's response to terrorism, including the decision to invade Iraq, reflected internal bureaucratic conflicts among intelligence agencies, defense departments, and political advisors. Criticisms, inefficient outcomes. Critics argue that bureaucratic politics may produce fragmented, inefficient, or suboptimal policy outcomes due to internal power struggles and compromises. Lack of unified vision. Internal competition and negotiations can obscure clear policy direction, resulting in ambiguity or inconsistent international positions. E. Comparative analysis. Rational actor model. Strengths. Clarity, simplicity, clear logic, and predictive capabilities. Weaknesses. Unrealistic assumptions, neglect of internal complexities, psychological factors, and incomplete information. Organizational behavior model. Strengths. Recognition of institutional realities, SOPs, stability, continuity, predictability. Weaknesses, rigidity, resistance to change, incrementalism, leading to potential inefficiencies. Bureaucratic politics model. Strengths, realistic depiction of internal politics, organizational interests, power dynamics, and complexity of decision-making processes. Weaknesses, decision ambiguity, inefficiency, lack of coherence, or clear strategic direction. F. Integration and practical relevance. In practical policy-making scenarios, foreign policy decisions often integrate elements from all three models. Rational assessments provide strategic direction, organizational behavior shapes implementation, and bureaucratic politics influences negotiation and final outcomes. For instance, strategic defense policies might originate from rational threat assessments. Rational actor model rely on existing military SOPs for operational implementation. Organizational behavior model and be shaped by internal bureaucratic conflicts. Regarding budget allocations or military priorities, bureaucratic politics model. G. Conclusion. Understanding foreign policy decision-making requires recognizing the distinct insights provided by the rational actor, organizational behavior, and bureaucratic politics models. Each model highlights critical dimensions of policy processes, contributing uniquely to comprehending complex international decisions. While individually insightful, integrating these models provides a more comprehensive and realistic understanding of how foreign policy decisions emerge, evolve, and impact global affairs